Hey, welcome to this week's episode of Ask the Instructor. It's Purple Wednesday today. Why is it Purple Wednesday? Because I'm wearing purple. But more importantly, 12 noon every Wednesday, we come to you live to help you understand the technical side of the real estate industry. Whether this is because you're trying to pass your real estate exam, or maybe you're just trying to get a better idea of what real estate's like in Florida, or maybe you're just trying to understand the real estate industry. Whatever it is that you're coming here for, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're liking. I'm glad you're subscribing and sharing to all your friends and family who might be somewhat interested in real estate. Maybe they own a house, maybe they rent a house. They should be watching this show so they understand what it is that they're doing with their money every single month. Again, I'm John Chrismo, and this show is brought to you by the Tampa School of Real Estate. If you're thinking about starting or enhancing your career in real estate, give us a call. Phone number's down below, 813-928-0106. You can also text us because, you know, we're fancy like that. You can call us, text us, whatever it is. Check out passfirsttry.com for all of our exam prep tools. I know these videos are great for exam prep, but sometimes you got to test your knowledge. Sometimes you got to make sure you're reinforcing the right information at the right time, and sometimes you're just making sure you're confident and prepared. We've got the whole strategy for you at passfirsttry.com. That's passfirsttry.com. Make sure to check that out there. Make sure you also subscribe to our Success Center. Our Success Center has the archives of all of these videos, so you'll be able to find all of these Ask the Instructor episodes that we do every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Time. You can go back, watch them all. That's a great study tool right there, and it's free, not just for our students, because that's why we started this show, but we realized there's a need for this information, whether you're a student or not of the Tampa School of Real Estate, and that's why we do these shows, because we know after you guys watch these, you're going to want to come take some actual classes with us. But anyways, let's get into what we're going to be talking about today. And it's definitely something important to know about. Leases. And you might say, John, I thought real estate was all about selling property. Why are we talking about leases? Well, you know what? You could actually make a commission money when you're selling property, or you could also make commission when you're leasing property. Whether it's you're working on behalf of the landlord doing maybe some property management, or maybe you're working on behalf of a tenant where you're a rental agent, there's a lot of money to be made, especially in the market we're in right now, because we're getting at all-time highs for rentals. And you know, maybe you don't want to deal with residential tenants, or you want to lease out and you don't want to lease out residential property. Maybe you're looking at commercial property. Maybe you're looking at investing in an apartment complex, or maybe you're looking at investing in an office building or investing in a retail plaza. You definitely want to know these different lease types. So there's several different types of leases that you could use. Probably the most common is what's called the net lease. So net lease, this is probably your most common type of lease that you're going to see out there. And this net term, we've talked about this before in this episode. If you've taken the classes with us, or maybe you just know a little bit about accounting, you probably know what this word net means. Net basically means not. And it's not what? Not expenses. So that word net basically means not expenses. So when we're talking about a net lease, this means that you have a lease payment that does not include expenses. So what happens with a net lease is you'll typically have, let's say, $1,000, and that's going to be your fixed lease amount, your base lease. So fixed or base, they might use a couple different terms to describe that. That's your base amount, but then on top of that, you might have a couple different terms, and depending on the property you're dealing with here, they might call it a couple different things. It basically all means the same thing. They might call these CAM fees, Community Association Management. They might call it triple net, or you might see this NNN, the triple net. If you're interested in learning more about what property will lease for in a particular area, or maybe you have a business that you're trying to lease a property for, or maybe you're a real estate professional and you're not satisfied with what you could find in the MLS, maybe you want to find and expand a little bit, check out loopnet.com. Loopnet.com is a great resource to find all kinds of information. It's almost like the Zillow of commercial real estate, but even if you haven't done anything yet with it, it's nice to go in there because you'll see these terms. You'll see this community association management, or you'll see this triple net term. And this is going to be some sort of fluctuating amount for these CAM or triple net. Now, usually when you're negotiating out some sort of lease, it might say that you have a base rate of, and typically if you're looking at commercial property, because if you're looking at a residential property, you might see something very basic like $1,000 a month. But that's not typical at all when you're looking in the commercial space, when you're looking at an office building or looking at retail space or anything like that. You're typically going to see a lease in terms of a cost per square foot. So let's say here that we're dealing with $12 a square foot. So if you see something advertised as $12 a square foot plus triple net or plus CAM or plus one of these various types of things they have for their variable types of expenses that they're going to charge you on top of this lease rate, this $12 per square foot, this isn't a monthly rate, this is an annual rate. Now, despite this being an annual rate, your lease is still typically going to be paid monthly. So you aren't really going to have an annual lease where you just pay once a year. You'd have some crazy amount of lease that you'd have to pay. So it's still typically paid monthly. And what you're going to be doing to figure this out, so it's $12 per square foot. Let's say that we're dealing with a 1,000 square foot property. So we've got a 1,000 square foot property that we're interested in renting. It's priced at $12 a square foot, but remember that's an annual cost. So what you need to do to figure out what the monthly cost is going to be, and these numbers that I've picked here, I've picked them intentionally to make this a little bit easier for the math that we're doing here. You might have more complicated numbers than this in the real world, but ultimately the math is exactly the same when you've got a calculator. I mean, it really doesn't matter what numbers you're punching in there. It's going to do the work just the same for you. So you take your square foot, 1,000 square feet, you're going to multiply that by the $12 per square foot. So each of these square feet in this 1,000 square feet is going to cost $12. So that means our annual lease expense for our base rent, remember that this is still the base rent. We still have our triple net that's going to be added on top of this here, but our base rent is $12,000 a year. So $12,000 per year. And then what you're going to do then is just divide this out by 12 because there's 12 months in a year. So $12,000 a year divided by 12 months, that ends up giving you a $1,000 base rent. So for this particular property, the base rent would be about $1,000. So we've got our price per square foot at $12, our 1,000 square foot here. If this was 2,000 square foot, that'd be about $2,000. That's just the way the numbers work here since I picked that nice even number of 12. But that's a relatively low rent, especially when you start looking, maybe not so much for warehouse space or industrial property or things like that, but if you're looking at retail space, that's a very low rent for retail space. Retail space, you're typically looking, depending on the popularity of the area, I've seen some of these go as high as like $50 a square foot that they're charging for these very in-demand types of areas. And typically when you're looking at this in a larger scale here, you'll have maybe where the landlord is they have smaller spaces. So these smaller spaces, they might have a higher cost per square foot, but if you're leasing out instead of 1,000 square feet, maybe 10,000 square feet, maybe that number goes down. And this is the number that's usually negotiated on. So when you're going back and forth doing the negotiations here, that's going to be where this is the number it is that you're negotiating on. And now 1,000 square foot, this isn't a very large property whatsoever here. This is usually about as small as you go for properties that are leasing out. And unless you're dealing with maybe some sort of executive office space, that's maybe going to be when you're dealing with a little bit less square foot here. But that's for the base rent for this one here. Now let's use another example. Let's use another example with some different numbers here. Let's say that we're trying to rent out, let's say 3,000 square feet. So we've got a 3,000 square foot property. And the price for this 3,000 square foot property, we're maybe going to be looking at, let's say, $15 a square foot. Plus, let's say the triple net again. You're usually going to see, unless we're going to talk about another one called a gross lease. A gross lease would be, this is your only number for your rent. This $15 a square foot, that'd be your only number if this were a gross lease, but with a net lease, you always have these additional triple net fees that would be on top of that. Now, before we start doing the multiplication, because this is how you're going to want to look at it in the real world, if you're dealing with a tenant, it's all really the same for them, whether they're paying $15 here and another $5 here, $7 here, whatever it comes out to be, it's really the same to them because that's what they're writing the check for at the end of the month. So for the most part, they're really not going to care what the base rent is versus what the triple net fees are and so on and so forth. And this is usually, even though this number is variable, and it may specify in the lease where this could go up or down by a certain percentage, or it might not even bound it by a certain percentage. You might be able to go up or down year over year. So, but let's say this triple net is going to be, let's say $7. So now we're not dealing with just the $15 a square foot for the rent. We're also adding in the $7 for our triple net fees. And what that's going to come out to basically is we're going to add these two together. So the $15 a square foot for our base rent plus our $7 a square foot for our triple net. And you might be asking what these triple net comes down to, what this NNN actually stands for. This is usually the taxes, the insurance, and other sort of variable expenses that might be involved with managing the property. We'll talk about in a little bit how to come up with this number, because maybe you're the landlord and maybe you're trying to rent out this particular space here, and you're trying to come up with what you should be charging your tenants for a triple net, because this base rent aspect of this here, that's usually going to be just covering your maybe your mortgage on the property as well as the profit that you want to make on it, where the direct expenses are usually going to be factored in under this triple net. More of a rule of thumb than how that actually works out in the real world sometimes, but it is good to know that math, so we'll get to that. Now, overall for this property, with our $15 a square foot of base rent plus our $7 a square foot of triple net charges, we'd ultimately be looking at about $22 a square foot for this particular property. And now let's say that we've got, let's pull out these numbers here. We've got our 3,000 square foot. We've got our $22 a square foot. This is our total rent, $22 a square foot. And then let's also say that this is a 3-year lease. Actually, let's do a 5-year lease, because you're typically going to be seeing 5 years. 3 is usually the minimum that you're going to see on most of these larger leases, especially something for a 3,000 square foot property. So let's say that it's a 5-year lease. So ultimately, we're going to find a couple different numbers out of this here. We're going to find what the total lease is going to be over the amount of 5 years. Why do we want to find that out as the real estate professional? Well, that's what your commission is determined off of. So that's definitely some handy math that you'll want to know how to do. But then we're also going to break this down into the monthly cost for our prospective tenant to help them understand how much it is they got to pay out of pocket every single month for this year. So we've got our 3,000 square foot, our $22 per square foot, which is our base rent plus our triple net, and this is going to be across a 5-year lease. So let's figure out the total real quick here. What we're going to do is take this 3,000 square feet. We're going to multiply that by the $22 per square foot. And then once we come up with this number, we're actually going to multiply it out by 5, so we figure out what the total lease, what this total transaction basically is valued at for this property here. So we'll have to pull out our handy dandy calculator for this one here. We're going to go ahead and take our 3,000 square feet we have, multiply that by $22 a square foot, and we're looking at about $66,000 a year. So $66,000 is our total annual rent for this property for our base rent plus our triple net charges. Now, this is a 5-year lease, so what we need to do is multiply this out by 5 years. And we're going to have our total lease amount, so 5 years times 66,000 gives us $330,000. So you might have been looking at this and said, well, this is only a property that's only a 3,000 square foot rental. What do I want to bother myself with as a real estate professional, wasting my time helping somebody find a 3,000 square foot rental? This probably isn't going to make me any sort of money on. How much money are they really making on the rental? Well, this is a 5-year term that we're dealing in on this lease. We're dealing now with a $330,000 transaction. And this is still a relatively small property, and this is still a relatively low cost per square foot foot for the rent on this property. So what we're going to do is take this $330,000, this is our entire lease that we're dealing with here, and let's say that we're charging maybe let's say a 3% commission, or we're getting paid a 3% commission on this property. So $330,000 now times 0.03, that ends up giving us a $9,900 commission. So as the real estate professional, that's the number we want to come out to for ourselves, but we still need to help our client understand what this is going to cost them a month. So what we're going to need to do is take this annual cost for our lease, this $66,000 that we came up as our annual cost, and we're going to go ahead and divide this out by 12. So 66,000 divided by 12, we're going to end up with $5,500 for monthly lease. So as the tenant on this property, we're looking at 3,000 square foot. It's $22 a square foot when we take in our $15 in base rent, plus the $7 a square foot for triple net. It's a 5-year lease that we've came up with here. It's $66,000 a year annually. Divide that up by 12, we get $5,500 a month. So the lease on this property, 3,000 square foot, $22 a square foot, comes out to be $5,500 when we figure this out annually. And that's just one type of lease. This is the net lease, and this could be even more creative. When we come back after the break, we're actually going to get down into figuring this out with maybe an escalating type of net lease, where this number could change, this base rent could change year over year, which this might be used to help a business that's more of a startup, more of just starting out, be able to lock in a lower rent to begin with. Because if you go to a landlord and say, hey, look, I just want to pay $10 a square foot, and that's the end of it, the landlord's going to say, no, I want $15 a square foot for my base rent. But if you say something maybe along the lines of, hey, I know you want to get to that 15 number, but we're a small business, maybe we'll start off at a lower rent, and that's another way you can negotiate. You can get really creative with negotiating out leases like this, especially in the commercial environment. So don't go anywhere. We're going to take a quick commercial break. I'm John Kurzmo. You're watching Ask the Instructor. Tampa 10 years ago is nothing like Tampa today. It's changed dramatically over those years, and that's what's really transitioning this to be the number one healthiest housing market in the entire nation.
Do you want to incorporate studying for your real estate exams into your busy schedule? Now you can review the key topics you need to know to pass your class and state exams with our MP3 audio review. Simply pop in your headphones or connect to your car to reinforce crucial information while you exercise or drive. Listen to the first unit for free at mp3audioreview.com. That's mp3audioreview.com.
Hey, if you liked the show today, be sure to hit like and subscribe and post your comments. Thanks so much for watching. Hey, welcome back to this week's episode of Ask the Instructor. I'm John Kurzmo, and every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Time, we come to you live. So this is live, so make sure you guys send in your questions, put it in the comments, put it in the chat, because I want to help you guys understand this information. If I'm just up here talking about this stuff, yeah, that's fun. I enjoy doing this, but I want to make sure you guys understand this as well. So whatever it is that you're maybe not quite sure about, that you don't understand about this here, put it in the comments, and I'll definitely try to elaborate further to help you get a full understanding of this material. And every Wednesday, 12 noon Eastern Time, Tampa School of Real Estate, John Kurzmo, Ask the Instructor. We come to you, into your house, into your work, into your lunchtime to help you understand these complex topics. And if you're interested in starting a career in real estate, make sure you call the number below, 813-928-0106. Or hey, maybe you don't like to talk on the phone. That's fine. Just give us a text message and we will give you the information you need. Anyways, let's get back into the leases that we're talking about here today. Before we went on the break, we were talking about the net lease, which this is probably your most common type of lease. This is what you see and not most common when we're dealing with residential. This is going to confuse and scare away most residential renters. If you're looking to go rent an apartment or rent a house and they start throwing numbers like this at you, they're going to be like, well, what is this costing me a month? But now you're dealing with a business and a commercial lease. Now it requires a little bit more knowledge. But hey, if you're a new business, and it's not uncommon that we're talking about this here. I've helped out a lot of businesses that are just starting out, get into some sort of rental. And ultimately, I make sure I tell them this number right here, because if I start explaining some of this other stuff here, I could spend a little bit of time, just like we're doing today, to help you understand this here, but ultimately this is what they care about. But that's not the information the landlord's going to give. Very rarely are you going to see where the landlord just says it's X amount of dollars a month. So this math is very essential, especially when you're trying to work in the commercial space and deal with clients that aren't just buying a property or renting a property for their home. So this net lease is very common. And the situation we had here, and again, if you guys got questions on this, send it in the chats. I got the Facebook and the YouTube chat loaded up right here on my handy dandy little laptop. So we had a 3,000 square foot property that we're looking to rent out. Our base rent was $15 a square foot. The triple net, which is sometimes also called CAM charges, was $7 a square foot. So together that totaled out to be $22 a square foot. This was a 5-year lease that we're looking at doing here. So ultimately we'd have 3,000 square feet times our $22 a square foot. That would give us a $66,000 a year annual lease payment. Now, we're not paying this lease annually. You're really never going to pay the lease annually. It's going to be paid for monthly. So what you're going to do is take that number, divide it out by 12, and you end up getting $5,500. That would be the monthly lease for the tenant. To understand what type of transaction it is that we're dealing with here, and maybe calculate out the commission that the landlord would be paying you in this case here, you'd have your annual lease times the term of the lease, which is 5 years, which gives us a $330,000 lease contract we're basically assisting with in this case here. And if this was a 3% commission that you had negotiated out with the landlord, that would mean that it's a $9,900 commission you'd be receiving coming into your brokerage for a transaction like this. Now, before we went on break, I told you guys about how maybe you could help out a newer business, a tactic you could kind of use to negotiate this out, because they probably, if you're just trying to go in there and get them to budge on this number right here, this $15 a square foot, this number, they're going to tell you they can't budge on it. And if they're doing the math correctly, they really can't, because that's what it comes out to for their taxes, insurance, and other expenses. So this number, you're really not going to be able to change that. And you could try negotiating it. I'm not going to tell you not to, but you're probably going to be shut down anytime you try to negotiate this triple net or CAM charge or anything like that, because they'll say, hey, look, this is how it's came up with. That's what we use to pay for the taxes and insurance. What do you want me to do? Not pay the taxes. So this is a number you really can't negotiate on. But this number, you'll be able to have a little bit of negotiating power, and I definitely recommend trying to negotiate this out. But if you go in there and say, hey, look, instead of me paying you $15 a square foot, how about I pay you $10 a square foot? The landlord might say, how about you don't? How about you pay me the $15 a square foot I want, or go find another place to rent out? Or they might say something along the lines of, hey, you know, this is the market rent, this is what's going on in the market, and so on and so forth. But, you know, they're running a business as well. And when you're looking at office space or retail spaces, that's kind of the advantage there. It's definitely going to be less emotional. It can still get emotional because, you know, people take their businesses seriously and they're sometimes very passionate about their businesses. But overall, this is going to be a lot less emotional transaction than you typically would have with residential property, where this is a place that people love, where they want to live, and they really want that particular house because they like the paint color on it. This one, it's a little bit more kind of matter of fact, a little bit more tactical on it here. But ultimately, the landlord would have an understanding. They work with businesses. They're probably a business themselves. I mean, really renting out the property, that's almost a business. Depending on whether you're negotiating directly with the landlord or if you're negotiating with the property management company who's handling the property, if you're going directly to the landlord, you probably could get a little bit better of a rate with this here. But let me tell you about how you could potentially negotiate this out to make it a little bit more advantageous, not only for the business that's trying to get into this property, but also for the landlord. So you're able to kind of cut down this rent, but still give an advantage to the landlord. And you might say, well, how can you make this a win-win situation? How can you make both the tenant happy by getting them a lower rate and make the landlord happy by giving them a higher rate? So we're going to use the same type of scenario here with a net lease here. We're going to say we're going to be dealing with the same property, and this is what they want. So let's say we went through and did this math, and we went to our client and we said, okay, the landlord, based on the calculation here, they want $5,500 a month, and that's not even including our rent tax. We have 7% rent tax in Florida, unless the new legislation they're trying to get behind actually goes through. They're trying to cut the rent tax in Florida. Hopefully that does go through, because that'll help out a lot of businesses and whatnot. But there's also a 7%, just like sales tax, there's a 7% rent tax that's going to be charged on top of this as well. So that's an even higher number that you definitely don't want to forget about in here. But let's just say we're going off of this here, because that's 7%. You're not going to be able to negotiate down the rent tax. Maybe the Association of Realtors and their Realtor Political Action Committee will be able to get the legislators to lower that rent tax, but that's going to be pretty much set in stone once the law is the law for that. But this number, that's going to be where your negotiation position is around. Either that, or maybe also the term of the lease. That could be something else that you negotiate on. But ultimately, I mean, if you're a business, I don't recommend as a business that you go moving around different places. Despite the fact that we're in the internet age, the digital age, where, you know, people are all over the place. I mean, they don't necessarily want to go into even a brick and mortar retailer anymore. So that's definitely something to take in consideration. But what happens when you do have somebody that wants to go into your brick and mortar retail location, and they go in your brick and mortar retail location to see that it's empty? They go there, they show up, and they see that there's no one there. They're like, oh man, this business must have closed down, when really maybe you just moved to a different place. So I always advise businesses, hey, look, find a place that you're going to want to plant some roots in. We could work on negotiating this down to get you in here maybe at a little bit lower rate, but you're going to want to plant some roots here, because what good is a business having a physical location, unless this is maybe some sort of industrial like warehouse where people aren't physically going to it. But if you do have people that are physically going to be going to the location, that's where you don't want to be moving it around, because you'll go there to go find it and you'll be like, wait a minute, it's not here anymore. They must have closed down. Oh, well, let me go check on another competitor of that business. So this number I don't really recommend negotiating on, because what also happens here, let's say we negotiate this down to maybe a 2-year lease or a 3-year lease or something along those lines. With these shorter term leases, this is a new chance for the landlord to come in here and basically renegotiate this deal, to retrade this deal without it being actual retrading here, because your lease is up, the term is over. So I would definitely probably, and this varies by situation, because maybe you have a business that's rapidly expanding and maybe they're going to outgrow this space, but you got to explore these alternatives here. And so this number, probably not the one you want to negotiate on, but this number right here, this is going to be what we're focusing on negotiating on. So let's say the landlord wants $5,500 a month, but we don't want to pay $5,500 a month. So what can we do here to kind of lower our burden? Now, like I said, we're going to target this base rent to negotiate. But if the landlord, you can basically go to the landlord and tell them, hey, look, I want to pay $12 a month instead, maybe they'll take that. If you're maybe only going $1 down or $2 down, or there's also tenant improvements we're going to factor into this, that could be a whole nother thing where maybe you get free rent for the first couple of months to help improve the property, to get it ready for your business to open, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, let's say we want to have less cash out of pocket, because ultimately $5,500, unless we're doing X amount of sales, you got to know what that break-even point is just to cover your actual rent. But that's a steep rent for a business starting out, and maybe 3,000 square foot is too much for the particular business. But let's just take this scenario. Let's say this is the property they want. They need this much square feet. How can we get this lease number lower than the 5,500 here? So and we're going to be aggressive with this negotiation here. Like I said, the triple net, that we're pretty much stuck with that $7 triple net. I mean, the landlord needs that to pay. That's what they factor in for the expenses. This base rent is what they factor in, for, number one, to cover their mortgage payment, but number two, to actually make money off of that. So that base rent, that's going to be our pliable aspect of this here. So let's say that for the base rent, what we're going to be doing, the strategy we're going to be using, and this is a strategy I've definitely used multiple times before, and it works. It works because it's a win-win situation for the tenant and the landlord. And what we're going to be basically doing, let's draw out a little chart here. So we have our years here. We're dealing with a 5-year lease, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and year 5. And this is our dollar amount for the base rent. Now, let's say what we want to do ultimately, we want to get that landlord up to the $15 base rent. So that's ultimately where the landlord wants to be, at $15. But let's try to structure this so we don't get to $15 until year 5. So let's go down to year 4 here, and year 4, let's make that at $14. And you can really just pick these numbers. You could complicate this lease as much as you want. Maybe the landlord doesn't want to get it complicated, but maybe they're just you just wear them down negotiating, because you eventually get to that point where they're like, all right, let's just do the deal. What do we need to? What's the most we could get you into? And so something like this, working off of this strategy, will definitely help get you something in a little bit earlier. So it's kind of like this escalating lease rate that you pre-negotiate out. So that way the landlord does get to that $15 they want, but they're helping out this new business get started, they're getting it established, and you're getting a long-term type of lease in there for the landlord, which makes it good for the landlord, because ultimately then they don't have to worry about replacing the tenant, because that's a cost to them. When a tenant leaves and the property sits vacant, every month that property is sitting vacant, that's just money flowing out that the landlord isn't able to capture anything off of. So ultimately, they don't want to do that. So let's say in year 3, let's drop it down even further. Let's say $12 in year 3. Let's say that we're going to do $10 in year 2. And let's say $9 in year 1. So what we've got here is basically an escalating rent. We pre-negotiate this out ahead of time, and this is just the base rent. This is still a net lease. We still got to factor in our $7 on top of that. That $7 is going to float on top of this here. So that's going to be right on top of all this, where that ultimately does change what the total rent it is that we're going to have. But that's $7 again. That's not going to be something really that you could change. And that number might even vary year to year. You might be able to get it locked in the lease, but that might be a variable number as well. But ultimately here, what you're looking at, instead of a $22 rent to start out with, you're looking at a $16 rent. Here you're looking at a $17 rent. Here you're looking at a $19 square foot rent. Here you're looking at a $21 square foot rent. And then finally at our 15 where they want to be, that's where we finally get up to that $22 a square foot rent. So what this is able to do, we're able to get the landlord to that $15 that they want to be at, but we're able to start off at the $9. And if you want to seal the deal a little bit better, what you could also do is throw in this little clause that I'm going to tell you about after this commercial break. So we're going to take a quick commercial break. We're going to tell you how to have another situation to lock in the property for even longer, to get the landlord wanting to do this a little bit more, entice them, dangle another little carrot for them here, with still giving the tenant a little bit of flexibility past this year 5. I'm going to tell you about that after this quick break. Don't go anywhere, and send in your comments in the and questions in the comments and chat sections. I'm John Chrismo. You're watching Ask the Instructor. Tampa 10 years ago is nothing like Tampa today. It's changed dramatically over those years, and that's what's really transitioning this to be the number one healthiest housing market in the entire nation.
Do you want to incorporate studying for your real estate exams into your busy schedule? Now you can review the key topics you need to know to pass your class and state exams with our MP3 audio review. Simply pop in your headphones or connect to your car to reinforce crucial information while you exercise or drive. Listen to the first unit for free at mp3audioreview.com. That's mp3audioreview.com.
Hey, if you liked the show today, be sure to hit like and subscribe and post your comments. Thanks so much for watching. Hey, welcome back to this week's episode of Ask the Instructor. It's Purple Wednesday episode of Ask the Instructor. Why is it Purple Wednesday? Because I'm wearing purple and no other reason. So this is Ask the Instructor. Every Wednesday, 12 noon Eastern Time, we come to you to help you grow, develop, mastermind, understand the real estate industry, learn topics you need to know, different types of math problems you might see. You probably won't see something this complex on your math exam, but this is the practical, more in-depth way. And what we're talking about in this situation here, we've been talking about types of leases, and we're talking about the net lease specifically today, which is your most common type of commercial lease. Residential leases, it's not going to be this complicated. Commercial leases, though, where there's a lot more potential to make a larger amount of money with a commercial lease, though, they do get a lot more complicated here. You're dealing with businesses that understand accounting, or that are supposed to understand accounting, and if they don't understand the accounting or the calculation of these square footages here, that's where they hire a real estate professional to help them make sense of this. And you might say, well, what does a business want to pay somebody? Well, what do they want to pay a real estate agent to help them lease a property? Can't they figure this stuff out? Isn't it pretty basic? As you can see here, not so basic, especially if you want to do one of these more complicated types of negotiation here, where you have one of these escalated rents to help get a win-win situation where the landlord gets what they want in year 5, but the tenant gets what they want in year number 1. And I'm going to tell you right away, the landlord probably won't go for this. I'm not going to say don't try. But the landlord probably isn't going to go for this right off the bat. But don't eliminate this altogether. We're negotiating. So what you're going to be doing here is just working off of these numbers here. You're going to be working off of these numbers. Okay, $9, that's too low for year 1. I understand your concern. I agree that is a lower rate. You want to agree with him here. But maybe you don't touch year 1 because that's what you want to get here. But maybe you bump up year number 5. And you say, well, wait a minute, you want to pay the landlord more? Well, really, you're paying the landlord less here because, all these years leading up to year 5, you're going to end up with a significant discount if we calculate out the total rate. But maybe they say, you know what, that's not good enough for me. I can't take that. I'm taking a huge discount. Okay, well, here's what I could do here. Let's go ahead and renegotiate this out here. Well, let's say $16. We'll get you up to $16. So we'll be paying you more. And by year 5, the business should be there where they could actually pay that amount. Right now, they're a new business, and they need this to help get started out. And you might be able to factor in tenant improvements. Maybe you're talking about the improvements that need to be made, the new floors that need to go in, the new walls that need to go up, the new AC units that need to go in, all these different things that could arise here. So that's where maybe you say, look, that's really why we need to get this lower rate here. But now, instead of just having one negotiation point of this $15 square foot base rent, you've now got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different negotiation points here. And what you could do to really seal the deal, this is that little trick I was telling you guys about before the break, something to kind of factor in with this here to make the landlord, give him another little carrot to kind of dangle out there, is say, okay, and this is also a win-win for the tenant because it helps reduce the uncertainty that's involved with this here, because you might say, okay, great, what if the landlord accepts this, but then after year 5, they jack up our rent to $25 a square foot? I can't tell you how many business owners I've talked to that have had closed down one of their locations or closed down their business entirely, or they're at risk of losing their business because the rent has shot up dramatically. And when that happens, that's due to the uncertainty. You say, okay, that's great, that might get us through the first 5 years, but if they're thinking about the long term, which they should be, what happens in year 6? So this is that carrot you could dangle for the landlord, as well as something to give your tenant a little bit more certainty, is you pre-negotiate the renewal. You pre-negotiate the renewal, okay, for the next 10 years. And this is really where you want to lock it in. You'll have an option to renew the lease for an additional 10 years at $16 a square foot. So you definitely, absolutely want to have this factored into the lease here. That you're able to renew this renewal option. And the key thing is that it's an option. So this gives the tenant security that if they want to maintain this location they've spent the last 5 years building the reputation for, that after, when we get into year 6 here and year 7, you could extend this for 10 years. I mean, you could negotiate whatever you want. You could negotiate out a 100-year lease if you want for this particular property. That's probably a little bit more because you want to still be realistic here, because you might say, okay, on year 5 we want to be another 5 years we want to have locked in, and then when you basically have that new lease, say, okay, yeah, we want to lock in another 5 years, pre-negotiate that out. It's easier to negotiate 5 years in the future, especially when you're talking about all these different things. You have the escalating rent. And this is a lot to keep in mind, which is the benefit of using a real estate professional in these transactions and why you're able to show value to a client. Because even if a business owner does understand how to calculate this all out, I mean, we're spending an hour today talking about how to negotiate this, negotiation strategies, the different ways that you could kind of structure this. And this is just still some of the very basic stuff here. You could get even more complicated than this when we're trying to structure this out here. So this is absolutely worth it to have a professional here helping negotiate this out. So you could, like I said, have that renewal term in there as well. But again, don't give up on this escalating structure. They might say, no, I don't want to do that. They're not saying, no, I want to do that. They're just saying, no, your offer isn't good enough. That's really what they're saying. You got to understand what they're really communicating to you. And they're not really communicating that they don't want to do this. I mean, they are, but they're saying, hey, this package that you've put together isn't good enough to get me to want to say yes. So you change the package a little bit. You play with these numbers. Find out what it is that they like. Ask them, say, okay, well, to make something like this, if you were thinking about possibly make this work, because maybe they said, no, absolutely not, I don't want to do an escalating structure. Well, if you were to do an escalating structure, would you want to see this number at year 5 increase, or would you want to see year 1 increased a little bit with maybe year 5 going down? Give them that ultimatum. Find out if they want the money now or they care more about the long-term type of thing, because that definitely matters to the particular landlord that we're dealing with here. And if you're dealing with a property management company, it's going to be a little bit harder. You're going to be in for a little bit more of a battle with it here, because now you have people that are paid to understand this, that are paid to know what's going on here. And it's not their property, so they might just get frustrated with it and say, hey, you know what, this is too much, no thank you. Yes, they are paid based off the leases that are in there, but they're not the owner of the property, although they may have the ownership interest in the actual commission that they're making off of this here. But like I said, you've got all these different points to negotiate off of here. And basically, you're structuring this out with this escalating rent. And so when you're able to do that, you're able to significantly decrease the upfront cost for the particular tenant. So if we do some quick math on this here, we're going to get rid of all this because we're going to need some space. And this is where it's helpful to utilize some sort of spreadsheet or something like that where it does the math for you. But we're going to do it the old-fashioned way, because you could always do that. It's just a little bit more calculation we'll have to do. But when you set this up with some sort of spreadsheet or something like that, it'll make it really easy when you start plugging in these different numbers to understand what that's going to cost your tenant. So before the $15 rate, the $22 a square foot, that was $5,500 a month, if you remember what we were talking about from earlier in the episode. So we had $5,500 a month that we're dealing with here. We're trying to get that number lower, and that's going to be significantly lower because now we're dealing with, again, 3,000 square feet. We're going to multiply that out now by the $16, because that's our $9 base rent plus our $7 triple net fee that we have in here. So we're going to multiply that out by $16 a square foot. And then we're going to take that, divide it by 12, because this is going to give us our annual rent, and that's going to turn it into a monthly number. So now when we take this and we do the $3,000 or 3,000 square feet, multiply that by the $16 a square foot, we get an annual rent of $48,000. So you can already see we're coming in a lot lower than the $66,000 we had back when we were figuring off of the $22 a square foot. But then we divide this out by 12, and now we've gotten this down to $4,000. So we've made a significant decrease in the amount of rent here. But ultimately, that's still $4,000 a month going to the landlord. And on year 2, month number 13, that's going to bump up another $1. So the landlord has an interest with this here for the business to do well, for the business to continue to be there, so that way they continue to get rent. But they have this kind of almost growing level of rent that they're going to be taking in here. And ultimately, we're going to get to that $5,500 level, or you might even have to get a little bit higher on year 5. But you're probably going to be better off on year 5 paying this higher rent than just walking right into it in year 1 with $15. An alarming statistic that, and this is definitely something why I emphasize this a lot, because with rent, this isn't an essential. Depending on the type of business that you have, I mean, this might be an essential, something you need, something that's necessary, but this isn't something that's going to, unless you're located on the busiest street in the world and you're getting all kinds of exposure, but it's going to cost you a fortune there, where it's probably not worth it, especially with the rental market we're looking at for the commercial market in the Tampa area. So this is a necessary expense that doesn't necessarily increase your return on investment. Yes, you have to have an office. We pay a fortune for this office here in New Tampa. We've got a huge office up here, and this isn't something giving us a return on our investment because we had the office, we needed the office. And that's be the same situation for most businesses, that you have to have an office, you have to have a location, you have to have the retail store, whatever it is that your business needs this physical location, which as the more we go online, the less this becomes a requirement, which that's definitely going to shake up this rental market down the road as we transition more into the online realm of things. But that's where I definitely recommend this, because this is a business killer. Having a rent that's too high that you can't afford is a business killer. I can't tell you how many businesses I've seen that have been evicted because they couldn't pay the rent. And why couldn't they pay the rent? Well, number one, they're not selling enough to cover the rent, but number two, that rent was maybe too high. There's something called business risk. And what business risk says that, okay, in year one, we're going to have income of $100,000. And we're going to have expenses of, use my fancy Wall Street voice here, we'll have income of $100,000, and we're going to have expenses of only $40,000, therefore yielding us a $60,000 profit. And you know, that's just year one, we're going to have this $60,000 profit. And based on the case studies that we've done in this controlled experiment through assistance of the university that has helped us come up with these numbers here, and we've got this detailed business plan, therefore, Mr. and Mrs. Bank Lender, you should give us this money here. No, that's not, look, so business risk says, okay, yeah, year one, yeah, you got $100,000 you're going to make. Did you really make that? No, you're probably only going to make $80,000, or you know what, maybe you'll only have $40,000. And you know what, okay, yeah, you still were able to make some money, but let's say these expenses here, they were at $40,000. These expenses actually added up to $60,000. That's business risk. Business risk says it doesn't matter what projections you came up with or how sure you are of your projections, things change. You might have made bad projections, or maybe the market changes, or something that you cannot predict has changed. So business risk says your income could drop and your expenses could go up. And now we've got this flip-flopped here. Yeah, it seemed like a great deal, $100,000 in income, $40,000 in expenses. It's a sure thing, right, that we get $60,000 in profit? Absolutely not. That's what business risk says. It says that our income could drop, our expenses could rise, and if we end up in this boat, $40,000 in income and $60,000 in expenses, we're $20,000 in the red for the year. So you could see why there's a benefit to starting off with these lower lease rates here. See if you could get this down lower and get a lower rent there. So that way, when you have higher expenses, when it costs more, when you have to spend a little bit more money on advertising you didn't think you're going to have to spend, or when you have to spend more money for all kinds of different things that could arise when you're dealing with a business. The more your business grows, the more problems and more obstacles it's going to have to overcome, and the more your expenses are going to increase. You'll have payroll expenses increasing. You'll have space costs that increases, you'll have advertisement costs and all these things that could go up. So you want to try to minimize, especially something like the lease that doesn't yield an exact return on investment. It's more of a necessary evil, so to say. That's where you want to try to lock this in at the lower rate up front. Because even though it's only $1,500, so going back to what we had up here, we had a $1,500 difference between our $22 a square foot and our $16 a square foot if we're using out this pre-negotiated escalating type of rent here. So even though we're only saving $1,500 a month, let's take that $1,500 a month and multiply it out by 12. Now how much money are we really saving here? So let's pull out our calculator here. $1,500, this might not seem like a lot, but $1,500 times 12 gives us $18,000. $18,000 that we're saving in year one. That's a huge savings, especially when we're talking about a business that's trying to make $100,000 and expecting only $40,000 in expenses. Now, rather than our expenses, because our expenses will still probably rise, but if we're able to save $18,000 in rent to begin with here, we'd be a lot better off. We'd still, in this scenario here, if we ended up with 40 and 60, we'd still end up losing $2,000, but would you rather lose $2,000 or would you rather lose $20,000? And the landlord's getting their money either way. Unless you go out of business and they're going to have to collect rent on you, they're getting their money either way in this scenario here. So $18,000, it might seem like, okay, $1,500 a month, we can afford the extra $1,500, we'll just have to sell a couple extra of whatever it is that we're selling. use the escalating rent structure, figure out, get that proof of concept within the first 3 years, use your time to tweak this out, and then year 4, you'll notice we have a little bit larger of increase. In year 5, we did that even larger increase. So definitely use this escalating structure. It's a great way. It's something I definitely recommend with new businesses, startups, or even with an established business. Maybe they're adding a new location that they don't know whether or not this location is going to be successful. Give it a little bit of a boost. Have some of that extra money, and with this you might still be spending this $18,000 a year, but if you spend $18,000 in that first year on advertising instead of $18,000 going towards your rent, especially if it's the same exact property that you're renting, you're going to get a much greater return on investment. Year 2 is going to look that much better, year 3 is going to look that much better, and year 5, your lease will hopefully just be nothing. You don't even care about that lease because it's so low in comparison to the money it is that you're making. I'm John Christmer. You're watching Ask the Instructor. We're going to take a quick commercial break. Send in your questions and comments in the chats. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. We're going to take a quick break, but don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Tampa 10 years ago is nothing like Tampa today. It's changed dramatically over those years, and that's what's really transitioning this to be the number one healthiest housing market in the entire nation.
Do you want to incorporate studying for your real estate exams into your busy schedule? Now you can review the key topics you need to know to pass your class and state exams with our MP3 audio review. Simply pop in your headphones or connect to your car to reinforce crucial information while you exercise or drive. Listen to the first unit for free at mp3audioreview.com. That's mp3audioreview.com.
Hey, if you liked the show today, be sure to hit like and subscribe and post your comments. Thanks so much for watching. Hey, welcome back to this week's episode of Ask the Instructor. Every Wednesday, 12 noon Eastern Time, we come to you, into your house, into your phone, into your computer, into your tablet, into your lunchtime to help you understand real estate stuff you need to know. And today we're talking about an episode that it's essential for real estate professionals, especially if you're planning on working in the commercial space, but it's so much more essential if you're a business owner to understand, at least if you don't understand all of this exactly here, and there's a lot more to know on top of this, to know that you need to use a real estate professional. And it's not required by law to use a real estate professional, so don't get me wrong here. You could definitely go into this blind, but that's why there's such a large failure rate with businesses. The statistics alarming. It's something like 90% of businesses fail within the first 5 years. Guess what? We're dealing with a 5-year lease here. So we've been talking about using this escalating structure here with this net lease to kind of get yourself in at a lower rate and then kind of boost this up year over year. So that way when you're starting out, you could take this extra money you're saving, this $18,000 we calculated out as savings in your rent, and use that in an actual expense that's going to help benefit your business. And if you don't believe me that the rent that you're paying, that the lease that you're paying, don't let use the term caveat emptor, buyer beware. Or in this case, renter beware, same concept here. Don't let the landlord say, oh, we've got the best location, we've got the best property, there's no way your business will fail in our property here. Let's look at shopping malls. I'm sure you have a shopping mall in your neighborhood. Tampa, we've got so many shopping malls. We've got International, West Shore, Wiregrass, the outlet malls, Brandon Mall, University Mall, I don't know if I mentioned that. There's all these shopping malls all over the place, but you go there, and if you pay attention to the stores that are going in and out, yes, there's some stores that have been able to stay in there for quite some long time, but even the giants that have been able to stay in there, the Sears, the Macy's, the J.C. Penney's, they're all in trouble right now because they're realizing that this rent, the property that they're standing in, especially in this day and age, in the digital age that we're in today, the rent, the land that they're standing on isn't an asset to their business. It's a liability to their business. It's maybe a necessary evil that they need to have, but that's why you see so many businesses, and not just talking about the big box retailers that are in big trouble right now, but also the smaller retailers. When you see the little, even the kiosk in the mall, those little kiosks that you see in the middle of the mall here, and why you see those shuffle in and out so rapidly here, because they charge a fortune for the rent. And yes, in a location like the mall, you'd think that'd be the best place to expose your product, your service, whatever it is that you're selling to the general public, and it may be. But for the rent that they're charging there, there's usually not an equal trade-off there. Usually not an equal trade-off, because probably what you're selling isn't going to recoup enough, or maybe what you're selling, you're not selling it hard enough, or you've got people there that are selling it, they're busy on their phones. I can't tell you how many times I walk past these little kiosks, and you'll see some of them that are trying to wave their little perfume sample in your face, and the other ones that are kind of just like sitting there on their phone. Somebody shows up, okay, cool, yeah, I guess I'll help you out. But yeah, so keep in mind that the rent that you're paying, that's a necessary evil. It's not an asset, it's a liability. And that's why you want to minimize this liability. You want to minimize this expense as much as possible. Yes, we could probably still get you in that prestigious location, but we've got to do this smart. We have to be very tactful, very strategic about how we're getting you in there to make sure that these first few years that are essential to your success in this business here, that you're able to survive these first few years. Because where are you going to have the least amount of sales? Year 1. Where are you going to have the most amount of sales? Year 5. That's how your business is going to work. Shouldn't you structure your lease to match your business? And when you're in the first couple years, having those lower sales, having a lower rent to correspond with that, and then using that money that you're saving, maybe just to survive and get by, but even if you do have the money to invest and spend in this particular business here, taking that money that you would have spent on rent and investing in something much more with a higher ROI, like advertising. Spending that money on $18,000 in advertising is going to give you 100 times, if not 1,000 times, if not 10,000 or 100,000 times more return on investment than you'd get putting that money in rent. Yes, you probably need a location. There's probably some sort of demand that you need for a physical space. Most businesses need a physical space, even if it's just a warehouse to store their product. Or maybe you're completely online and digital, you probably still need a place for people to work. So most businesses will need an actual physical location to actually work in. But remember, this isn't something that's giving you return on investment. So you want to try to minimize this as much as possible, but maybe that space is what you need, so use this escalating rent. So that is our net lease. Really, this whole episode today has been all about the net lease. And I'm glad we did that, though, because there are other types of leases that are available, but the net lease is going to be the one that you're going to see in most business situations. In most commercial leases, you're going to see a net lease, whether it's a retail plaza or it's a office building or any of these different types of scenarios here, you're probably going to see a net lease. And you got to know how to negotiate this. If you're a real estate professional, there's a lot more you want to know behind this even further. The tenant improvement aspect here, all kinds of different terms that you can negotiate out and things like that. So it's essential that you're using a professional. Don't go out there and do it yourself. And hey, if you are a professional trying to learn this information here, at the very least get your license to begin with here. Go to tampaschool.com. Check out our program where we talk a little bit, maybe not this intense about it, because this is a very detailed, practical way of how you see this in the real world, but you will learn about the net lease and do some calculations with that, whether you're taking our online or our classroom courses, or hey, if you already got the license, make sure you do your post-licensing. We've got all kinds of continuing education courses that specialize in things like commercial properties and specialize in all kinds of different aspects that you need to know. Maybe you want nothing to do with commercial. We've got courses that will help you out based on the specific topics it is that you're looking for. So definitely check that out at tampaschool.com. If you're trying to pass your exam, check out passfirsttry.com. That's passfirsttry.com. And yes, that website is about getting you to pass your exam on the first try. So if you're trying to pass your exam, that's maybe a site you want to check out. But other than that, that's all I've got for you guys this week. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks for liking. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next week. I'm John Carismo. You've watched Ask the Instructor. Tampa 10 years ago is nothing like Tampa today. It's changed dramatically over those years, and that's what's really transitioning this to be the number one healthiest housing market in the entire nation.
Do you want to incorporate studying for your real estate exams into your busy schedule? Now you can review the key topics you need to know to pass your class and state exams with our MP3 audio review. Simply pop in your headphones or connect to your car to reinforce crucial information while you exercise or drive. Listen to the first unit for free at mp3audioreview.com. That's mp3audioreview.com.